Are you looking for a company that checks all the boxes? Waldorf Essentials provides homeschool curriculum written by homeschoolers for homeschoolers. We provide many options from digital to hard copies and individual blocks. Visit waldorfessentials.com.
Welcome to this week's podcast. This week we are talking about age placement and sort of navigating that. And I have my good friend with me, Vanessa Hartman, who works for us. And she also has a child in our Seasons of Seven school. And the conversation came up about this because she has a child that's younger and they play baseball and they have all of these other things. So it's a question we get a lot. And I thought we would tackle it from the beginning, and then we'll sort of discuss how you're planning to navigate it, Vanessa, and how we can help other parents navigate it as well. So let's start with, and please feel free to jump in, but we're going to start with sort of starting off with correct placement. So if you are coming from a non-Waldorf background, it's really important to remember that Waldorf is a completely different animal. So yes, Waldorf and mainstream education, they're both education methods, but it is like comparing an apple and an orange. They're both fruits, but they taste very differently. They juice very differently. The flesh of the fruit is very different. The skin of the fruit is very different. So it's important to remember when you're navigating where your child should be, that we do not look at the public school model at all. So in a Waldorf, we place purely by age, because we are looking at that developmental space. And I know a lot of people will say to me, oh, but my child is highly mature. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about sort of their soul development and their soul age. And so their age of 7 or nearly 7 is when we start first grade. We don't start before then. Does not matter if the child is reading. Doesn't matter if they can do complex computations. What matters is the content for the grade and for the age is what's specific every year. So if you've got a child that's coming into first grade Waldorf and you're worried that they're going to be bored because they maybe know how to read, I guarantee you they don't know how to do all of the other pieces. So Waldorf is a full curriculum, as in it means head, heart, and hands, the full body. It means the head and all of the intellect. It means the heart and all the feeling pieces. And it also helps them with the will pieces with the hands. And so when we are looking at other methods of education, they are usually just educating the head. So they're not as concerned with the content, the when and where for the content, and how it affects the child's soul and how it affects their will development as well. So in Waldorf, you have this perfect space of understanding the full child. So it is really important when you're sort of looking at this path to make a decision based on understanding the development of your child and understanding the curriculum. So why is that so important? Again, we've discussed the content starts with the age of the child. So in class 1, that child of class 1 needs those fairy tales. They need that conflict resolution that comes from the fairy tales. In class 2, they have a lot of fables and they're looking at a lot of moral stories where we're not giving them the moral, but we're inviting them to a space where it comes freely from them. In class 3, we're looking at a lot of like right and wrong. And we're also looking at creation stories in class 3. And that is specific to where the child of the 9-year change is. And the entire curriculum is sort of laid out in this manner so that there is something for every year that totally meets where the child is age-wise. Now, it does get a little different in about 8th, 9th, 10th grade. Where it starts to shift just a little bit. We're spending more time discussing the intellect and working on the intellect, but that's because the child of 14 and up, their intellect is born then. The intellect is not born when they're 7. The intellect really begins to be born when they're about 14. So when we're looking at those teenage years, we can adjust a little bit if we need to when it comes to placement, but really we're looking at where they are with their intellect. So I think that's really important as you're sort of looking at Waldorf as an education method, that when you come to Waldorf and we might say, oh, well, I know your child is in class 3 in public school, but actually our cutoff is way different and you'd be in class 2, that you don't freak out and go, oh, but my child is going to be behind and oh no, how do we manage this? How do we navigate this? Because I'm going to tell you the truth. In a Waldorf school setting, brick and mortar school, often they will fudge it because they want the numbers. In a homeschool setting, we're not in that space. We want your child to be perfectly placed for a couple of reasons. One, when you're the one homeschooling them, it is so much easier and more delightful to have a perfectly placed child than it is to be working with a child that is not perfectly placed. And when it comes to programs like our Seasons of Seven school, it is the same for our teachers. So our teachers would be not happy if we put children in that were too old or too young into their classes, because that makes their job harder. When the content matches the children that are in front of you, then the whole class is engaged rather than you're trying to engage kids that are all over the place because the content does not match who they are. So I think that's a really important place to start from when you're looking at Waldorf as an education method, because it is really important for placement. So what exactly does placement look like? In the Northern Hemisphere, so that's North America, most of Europe, like in the Northern Hemisphere, we are looking at a cutoff. I like my cutoff to be like in March. And I know that sounds crazy because the public schools cutoff is often like September, but we really want kids to be the age of their grade for as much of the year as possible. And if you have a child that's got a November, December, January birthday, well, those are perfect because then they are going to be the age of their grade for most of the year. But if you're bringing a child into a grade and their birthday isn't until April or May, well, then they're going to get 1 month of the grade content that they need for their age. And that is not appropriate. That will be much harder for you. And I have 5 kids. So my kids are like all over the spectrum when it comes to birthdays. I've got a couple of January birthdays, a March birthday, an April birthday, a June birthday. So I've had to navigate this with all of my children. And I tell you, the one that has the March birthday, I should have kept back and I didn't. I had an argument about it with my ex-husband and he won. I let him win. And the entire school career, I was constantly shifting blocks so they met him perfectly where he was. And really, I think when we're looking at just your job as a homeschooler, ditch the grade, ditch the idea of what grade you're in. Like, don't be even thinking about that. My kids are like, what grade am I in again? Because it's really about the content. We're really just walking the content. And I find that to be a much healthier space to be when we're sort of, teaching our kids at home. Do you have anything to add, Vanessa, and your experience?
I have a few things. Yeah, we did the whole thing for many years of we're homeschoolers. We don't necessarily have a grade, but actually, like, we really proudly wear grade 5 now, I feel like we actually say it more.
Yeah.
And we're in this environment of being mostly around sixth graders. And now I've had more support than anything of people saying, like, especially for a boy, like, I should have held them back.
Absolutely.
So I had first started homeschooling in Hawaii, and you're required as soon as they're 5 to enroll them as a homeschooler. And so I enrolled him technically in kindergarten like a year early. And so I guess you would say we did kindergarten twice.
Mhm.
And luckily back then, no standardized testing started until they do it every odd year, starting in grade 3, but we had left before
Mhm.
that. And so that's one of the things I think to navigate with age placement is different states are different.
Yep.
As far as that, here now we're in Washington, and with his birthday, I just on my declaration still said the grade we're doing. I've never had anyone contact me or say anything. So I think the intimidation factor can like scare people to like, oh, I have to because they're saying it.
Right.
It's
Right.
always a way around it. You just ask questions, get involved in homeschool communities. There's always a way to find
Right.
a
Totally.
solution. So we now looking back, we're I guess technically on our 6th year of homeschooling, even though we're doing grade 5 since we did kinder twice.
Right.
Um, After doing that, I feel like it was definitely the right grade placement because I could see exactly like when we were doing the 4 processes, like how things would click differently each year.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine if we were doing that a full year ahead and how many struggles we would have been gone through. And then homeschooling's not enjoyable for anyone. And
No. And you feel like you're beating your head against the wall. And a lot of moms that are doing this get really discouraged. And so often that discouragement comes from like how your prep is and whether or not your child is properly placed. Totally.
especially too with the reading was really, really hard for us to navigate. And and we waited until grade 1 to start the letters and all the things. So I can't imagine trying to teach him how to read
I
at
agree.
4 or something. Like, I'm always like, you guys, we did it. We got through reading as a family. We can do
Right,
anything.
right, we can do
Like,
anything. No, that's a big one. Like that's a really big one. I think that that scares a lot of people away. But it really like when you have a properly placed child, they're primed and ready for it. So my child that I did push forward because of pressure, he still did not want to read until he was 7. I just remember we were walking to church and it was within walking distance of our home. And there's a point where you're all there on Sundays and everybody can read from the pew or from the hymnal. And there's a point where kids aren't. And so Eric used to teach the kids to just sing peas and corn instead, like in tune with the music. And there was one Sunday where you could tell it just clicked with my son. And on the way home, he was like, my mom won't teach me how to read. And Eric was like, oh, yes, she will. And then he read like in a week because he was ready. He was primed and ready. And before that, he hadn't been ready, but it was the same sort of situation. Like you feel like you're trying to push a donkey up a hill if you're trying to teach a child that's not properly placed because they're just like a temperament on top of that. That makes it even harder if you've got a more phlegmatic child or a child that's got, different temperaments. But truly, when you're adding then the placement not being correct, it makes it so much harder to teach that child. And it really makes you doubt yourself as a mother. I'm telling you, it makes you like ask yourself, like, am I doing this right? What's wrong? Is there something that I could be doing differently? And so really placement is huge. It's absolutely huge. And I think it's important to recognize that you're going to have a wide range of ages within a grade. So, if the cutoff is March, then you're going to have in that grade anybody from April to the next year in March in that grade. It's a very large span. And so as a homeschooler, you can kind of adjust some blocks if you need to. But if you are perfectly placed, then you really should be fine for all of the blocks. And you brought up a good point about boys being different. So I think especially when it comes to boys, there's just busier, like being a mom of 3 sons, like one, I don't know how I'm still alive sometimes, but like they're just busier than typically than girls. Not all girls. I have a busy girl too, but when it comes to being ready to settle into school, I definitely notice the girls are ready before the boys are, but still that proper placement is super, super, super important.
well, and
Um,
Kai's really close on it. He's April 3rd. So it's almost like it's like a week, you know.
right.
But
It makes a
um
difference.
even now, like watching his seasons of 7 class and like
Mhm.
on the sharing days and like the girls sharing these like beautiful work and stuff, like he's like he makes an effort and he's like grown a lot in his main lesson book entries, but still he would rather be outside throwing a ball
Of
than
course. Of course, of course. Yeah.
so.
No, and it gets better as they get older and they start to sort of settle in even more. But definitely there's a big difference between the two. How did you navigate, or maybe you didn't have to navigate a whole lot? Did you have anybody like fussing at you for this whole delayed academics thing, which I'll talk about that in a minute because I don't think it's actually delayed. But did you have anybody fussing at you about that when you started?
So that was a point I was going to share because I feel like it's two things happening at once. Like you're deciding to homeschool for whatever reasons you are, which can make people feel uncomfortable. And then you're also doing delayed academics, which is going to
Right.
make people feel uncomfortable. And so that's two big things at once. And unless you're like stubborn, set in your ways, or very like confident in yourself, like you do get random people at the grocery store or family or friends. And I didn't have, I mean, people definitely challenge things, but I think they knew me enough, like they weren't going to change my
Right,
opinion.
right, right.
Um, It definitely took me longer to get my husband on board with it, of like, it's all gonna work out. And still clearly, distinctly remember the day that it clicked for him, that he was watching a kid in our alley like draw with chalk and could already like write and read and stuff. And he got home and he's like, just like, give me your spiel, remind me that we're like not gonna mess up our child and we're doing okay. And I was like, Michael, at the end of the day, would you rather have this child that was on the street that you're watching and he can do these things, but by the way, he was spelling that incorrectly, but his behavior, look at his behavior compared to ours. Our child is
Right?
kind, he is helpful, he loves nature, all these things. And I was like, which is more important
Which
at the
one
end
do
of
you
the day?
want? Which is more important? Absolutely agree.
And then after that day, I never got a comparison again.
That's
And
great.
it's interesting too, because we've had Waldorf friends on this whole journey in different aspects in different states and stuff. And it's almost like the Waldorf kids spot each other. There was this girl that was like twice Kai's age at the beach and we were playing. And later the mom came up and she was like, my daughter just kept like saying like, Mom, there's something different about that kid. Like he's a Waldorf kid.
That's so
And
funny. And he was.
yeah, I was like, well, I don't know if that just mean it. Yeah, it can mean so many different things, and like it's not necessarily the wood toys and better food or
No,
staying.
but it's interesting because you just made me think about a time when I had my second son with me. Rarely with five children do you get to go on a long trip with just one child, but I was on a long trip with some friends and I had taken him with me. And we went to the Sacramento Waldorf School when everything was still up and going there with the bookstore, and the bookstore was amazing. And he was about 10 years old. And I walked into the bookstore, which was this like if you like Waldorf books, there's like a space you go in, it's like a little magical space. There's like some wooden toys over here and like angelic people to help you, beautiful art on the walls, all the books you can think of, like, flutes in the corner. Like it's a beautiful space. But we walk in there and there were some boys standing around. I remember specifically because I bought the book. It was the book Tall and the Adventures of Noom Zor Noom is what I think the book is called. And they were about Jacob's age. And it was like we went in the store and he was with me and they were like magnets. And they wanted to tell him all about this book and why he should read this book. They didn't know him from Adam, but it was like this magnetic, and then he felt like he had these friends at the school that how kids act at that age. So it's just kind of funny because I do think there's a different quality about a child that is raised in wonder and awe than a child that is this filled with academics so early. So let's talk about that academic piece really quick, because a lot of people talk about delayed academics in Waldorf because we aren't teaching them to read in kindergarten. And really, like, I truly don't believe that's delayed academics. It's just different academics. You're just using a different cycle. And what's beautiful about that, and beautiful about allowing the child to unfold the Waldorf way with reading, is the strength of their reading later is much better often than their public school counterparts, because they've been given this time to have it unfold. They've been given this time to really understand language and to really be able to work within the sounds of those letters. We often have a lot of people that come to us in second or third grade and they're like, I feel like I got to go back because even though my kid can read, there's some stuff that isn't sticking right. And so I think it's really important to sort of look at the Waldorf way of reading and allowing this unfolding. What I noticed about my kids is that every time we were in a situation where there were a lot of like, a civic situation or even a church situation where they had parts to read for a play, my kids ended up with more parts because they could easily read them for their age versus the kids who went to a public school setting and maybe they could read just fine. But when it came to being able to speak it, read aloud, be in front of people, there's a different quality when you have brought this education the proper way and the right timing for these kids, because they tend to shine in a different way. And I think that it's really important as we're sort of looking at this idea, it's not really delayed academics, because one other thing you could always say to somebody if they're like, I can't believe you're not going to teach them to read right away, just remind them, excuse me, that We also teach all 4 math processes on the same day in first grade. And in public school, they teach them to add first and then subtract and then multiply and divide, and not in the same day and not in the same year.
I
So I
was
think,
actually talking to a little girl on one of our friends. She's in first grade, and so I was asking. I was curious. I was like, "Oh, well, what are you doing in school? What are you learning?" She's talking, and then so I'm telling her like cute little stories about Abigail Addition, and
mhm,
I was actually like, she was just I was teaching her how to knit and stuff, and how to finger knit and all these different things. She was so curious. So I was telling her about the relationship of Abigail addition and multiplication and how they work together. And she was like so in awe. And she's like, "Oh, we only do addition at school." And
yeah.
so it was interesting to just, I wasn't feeling like I was quizzing her. She just wanted to tell
No,
me.
it just
I
was,
was like,
it's interesting to listen to them, isn't it? It's like, and you know, when I get emails from people that are new to Waldorf and they come in like second or third grade, they'll tell me, "Gosh, we haven't done this stuff yet." So that's all right. You can start at the beginning. What tends to happen is when you, even if you bring Waldorf math to an older child, is it fills in holes that they didn't even realize they had. So, I mean, I think it's a really beautiful place to be. So whenever somebody fusses about delayed academics, I usually say, well, let's talk about math because
well,
math
too,
is so different.
with the reading aloud thing of how you're saying with confidence, I was also really proud of Kai. He was, I don't know, 5 or 6, and his friend was like reading out loud this thing, and then she was like, "Oh, Kai, do you want to read it?" And the dad was like, "Grace, you know Kai doesn't know how to read." And Kai was like, "Yeah, Grace, you know I don't know how to read. We're prioritizing time in the forest right now. There's
Oh,
time for
that's
reading
hilarious.
later."
No, I think that's great because that actually brings up another point. I always told my, like when my kids were off at Sunday school or scouts or anything like that, I always went to the leader and any co-leaders first and said, "Listen, we're not prioritizing reading right now. Do not call on my child. You can ask them to erase the chalkboard. You can ask them to take out the trash for you, rearrange chairs for you. You can ask them to do a myriad of other things that they would be happy to do, but please don't ask them to read because I think it's rude." And whenever I taught kids that age, Waldorf or not, I never asked them to read out loud because I feel like it's putting them on the spot too early.
Well, and even in seasons of 7, we were with Daniela all last year and then with her again this year. And she never forces the kids. She always says, anyone that wants to read, raise their
Right.
hand. And you see the people that are very confident and they want to. But then even like we as a family, like Kai, like just sometime throughout the year, try it once. And
Right.
you
That's a good
choose the
rule.
day that you're confident. And he's grown so much in it. And they're actually on Wednesday in the student office hour when he goes, he's not comfortable yet reading aloud, but he'll read with the kids. And when they get stuck on the words, he knows
He
them.
knows them.
So
That's
it's
great.
just practicing more, getting the confidence
Absolutely.
with it. And I actually, going back to when you were talking about um, the reading and like, so now how kindergartners, they have to like memorize 1,000 sight words before they even go. We
Uh,
never have done like spelling lists or that
we've
stuff.
never done it either. Mm-mm.
And last week, Daniela was doing like writing dictation that she would read it and then they would
Mhm.
write it. And we worked through it, and I was shocked how well he knew how to spell just by reading. And I was like, oh, like,
That's usually what I tell parents is that if you've got a child that's struggling with spelling, get them reading, and the more they read, the more they'll see those words, and it usually will translate into spelling better. Like it's almost always a correlation. For the kids that it doesn't, just buy them a little Webster dictionary, underline the words that aren't spelled correctly, and hand them the dictionary, and they'll only do that about 5 times before they're like, "Oh, I just need to slow down and spell them correctly." Because it's usually the kids that are in a hurry that aren't spelling correctly, you know. So of course there's exceptions to that, but 9 times out of 10, that's the case. I think another interesting space here is, you know, when you're homeschooling, say you're homeschooling and you want to come to Waldorf in like fourth or fifth grade, and you've got, you know, you've got a child that's used to being in, say they think they're going to sixth grade and oh no, you're going to do fifth grade again. I think it's really important to discuss the content of what it is that they're coming to, because they don't have that content. They've not had, and I've had this conversation many times with people who message me, oh, we're going into sixth grade. I go, okay, well, have you done ancient cultures yet? Have you done Greece yet? Have you done the geography of America yet? Have you done any botany? And then they're like, oh, wait, we've not done any of that. So you can either choose to try to cram it all in and not do a good job, or you can just do fifth grade where you're supposed to be. And that's really, that's 9 times out of 10, that's what ends up happening. And parents always come to me like, in the 20 years that I've been coaching, I've never had somebody come to me and say, I'm really upset that you put me in proper placement. Never. I've definitely had people come back and say, I feel really silly. I didn't listen to you. And here we are, we're struggling. And I think we need to go back and try again. So I think it's best to sort of really look at the reasons why we have placement the way we do. And if you're coming later with an older child to homeschooling, or coming later with an older child to Waldorf, just look at the placements, because there's so many things that I guarantee you didn't do that have nothing to do with the academics. So it's really important to sort of get those pieces in place.
And I think a lot of the things too are fun for the kids. Like it's showing them like, oh, the benefits of homeschooling of actually slowing down, and let's enjoy
Yes.
this or stuff. It's not like here's another checkbox we need to get off your transcript to move through. Like,
Absolutely. Because I think if you're considering Waldorf in general, not that you wouldn't be a super academic parent, because you can totally do. I mean, I know kids that went to Harvard with Waldorf homeschooling, so there's that. But in general, you're looking for a slower life. You're looking for a more connected life, and so don't fight that. Like what's so funny to me is the moms that do come and they're like, yes, I want this slower pace. I want this connection with my child. But then they're fighting for that limitation. And we have to continually de-school as adults what we think we know about education, and realizing that really the child learns through connection. And once we have that slower pace and that connection piece, the learning is so much more fun. So much more fun, because if you're not having a good time, then you're doing it wrong. So we should have a chat if you're not having a good time. Um, if you have a child that you're trying to play that catch-up game with, I would definitely say you've got a child that's coming in fourth or fifth grade. I would definitely go back to the beginning of form drawing and work on those forms. That can be done in a couple of weeks over the summer. And the same with mathematics. I would go through all the math just to make sure there's no gaps, and go through it as quickly as possible, because I think that it's really important to make sure that you have those pieces in place. So I'm thinking about what you were talking about with regards to sports, what started us in this conversation. So why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because that's something that unless you have a child that's thinking about some sort of professional sport, it's probably not going to be on your radar. It wasn't on my radar, because even though I have kids that play golf, they just play with like the regular league. So you're talking about kids that are like moving forward. And so this would be your baseball players, tennis, like anybody where you're in a cutoff that is not mom made. So talk about that a little bit.
so obviously when we started homeschooling, I had no idea Kai was going to pick up a baseball one day and chuck it and be like, I want to be a pitcher when I grow up.
Right.
So we also did the whole Waldorf thing of like, no, don't jump into all these different sports, all these different commitments
Right.
and stuff. Last year was his first year playing travel ball, so that means we play all year long. There's like 2 weeks off in between seasons. You're at tournaments all weekend, and we love it. He loves it. It's his choice to be in it, and we do though say no to a lot of things so that we can prioritize that. Um, so baseball cutoff is May 31st. So it's almost like the flip side of Waldorf age placement. So he's one of the youngest because he turns that he's April. So he's like he's playing with sixth graders, but he's in fifth grade. And actually a lot of his team is on the younger age too, that I'm like, we all should be back.
Right.
So what's going to happen, and I talked to his teacher, Miss Daniela, that I was like, well, I'm not going to be, fostering his love for this game year after year, I'm not going to then be like, oh, the year everyone's looking at scouts and stuff is the year.
Right.
Nope, we're going to finish our Waldorf homeschooling. So it's like, do we catch him up now? Like work on it of like, okay, do grade 5 this year, work on grade 6 key components over the summer, and then like, or what do we do? And I'm glad I brought it up to her this year because she's like, no, Vanessa, you
Just keep
still
going.
keep him where he is. He's doing well with it. And I think she doesn't want to lose us.
Well, but I think too, when I think about it, so when I think about the content of class 12, it is a consolidation of everything. And so while it would be great for a child to have that, you really are done at 11.
Well, and
So,
she was like, think of it as high school is kind of like if they're preparing to go to college, think of it already of like these little classes piecing together, like what is their goal of it, and
right,
still getting content that's for meant for their age. But so her recommendation was to just do high school in 3 years. And then also too, I mean, it's a big decision in grade 5 to be like, okay, we're all in for
right,
this fall, but
absolutely.
are you
But, you
still
know,
I
there's a lot of parents that are thinking about that. So I think it's a really good conversation that we're making these decisions when they're in 5th grade about what's going to happen when they're 11th grade. And honestly, most of us wanted, like most little boys wanted to be a garbage man when they were in 5th grade. So they might not still want to be a garbage man when they're in 11th grade. I know pitching is different, but you know what I'm saying? Like children change. And so we want to foster that love and continue. I know that Melanie that runs a school with me, like her son is a professional tennis player. And so, yes, you're fostering that, but I know for all the people that I know who have kids in competitive sports, if they decided tomorrow, I don't want to do it anymore, you'd be like, all right, well then let's regroup. And if you make a decision in 5th grade that affects 11th grade and you have to make a change, well, then you're constantly changing. And so I feel like stay the course. And what I really feel is the 12th grade content is like icing on a very beautifully made cake. And the cake is so good and so scrumptious and so moist that you don't actually have to have the icing. You can have the cake without the icing, or you can just put little dollops of icing here and there as you're going through that last year. So I find it okay that if you were to get there and decide, hey, we want to just do 3 years, I think it's okay. I think it's okay. And I think that, when it comes to professional sports scouting and things like that, I think that he's not doing school then in order to get into a college. So it's a completely different conversation, right? So it's like looking at the child in front of us, which is what Steiner tells us to do anyway. Who's in front of us? What do they need? You know? I think it's really important. So I think that's great advice from her. I don't think she wants to lose you, but I also think it's great advice. I also think that when you've got then an older one, so Super Sam turned 18 in the summer between his 11th and 12th grade year. And I gave him the opportunity. I said, listen, you're 18, you're a grown man. He said, but I want to go back and finish. I'm enjoying it. I want to finish with my class and I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I think that's an okay place. I think especially in the United States, we are pushing these kids out the door at 18. We are sending them off and I think they're not ready. So I think that like whole section of having a gap year, if you will, or a longer year at home is perfectly appropriate. And it really should be part of our culture in general, rather than shipping kids off at 18 to college to live somewhere else away from their parents, get in all kinds of trouble and not like have the parenting that they still need, because our parenting job isn't done at 18. These children are not fully, their brains aren't fully developed until they're in their 20s. So they need us to lean on them. Plus, I think it is really a travesty to jump into being financially responsible for yourself when you are not ready. And so it's about like making that walk. And it's a different walk for each child.
You know, a lot of the great responses I've gotten to people, because they're always like, "Oh, what school do guys go to?" And I'm like, "We homeschool." And so they'll ask me different things, and it's come up a lot where I'm like, "Oh yeah, like I know everyone's in grade 6, but we're doing grade 5 this year." And even this week, multiple people like, "Oh, I wish I would have held my son back." And one mom, this is the first time I've heard someone else say this, but they're like, "You know what I regret most about my decision is I'm losing my child a year earlier." And
Yes.
I was like, wow, I'm impressed, these parents. Like, so
No,
I
but
think more
but it's
people are
that
getting
public
it.
pressure, right? It's that pressure that so many people feel, whether it's from your neighbor, your mother-in-law, somebody at the grocery store, it's that pressure. And really, we have to be strong enough as mothers to remember that God didn't give them to the neighbor or the person at the grocery store or our mother-in-law. We are the ones. They came through us. They chose us. From a karmic perspective, they chose us to be their parents. They didn't choose all these other people to be their parents. So we need to be the ones making these decisions, and we need to be the ones like standing firm in our decisions. And I there's a lady that comes to office hours all the time who I love dearly. She said has her kids say something when people try to quiz her kids, I think is hilarious. And I have adopted it completely in my house. When somebody tries to quiz your child, you should have them say, actually, it's not testing day today. Like she says, says it to the in-laws that are constantly trying to quiz. The kids saying in the grocery store to people who are trying to quiz, because that's like really rude. Somebody finds out you homeschool and then they start to quiz your child. You tell somebody you go to the public school down the street, they don't start to quiz your child. It's
Yeah,
really absolutely inappropriate. So I try to always like arm my kids with, well, you're not my parent and you're not my teacher, so I don't actually have to answer you.
we do the whole, it's actually, I was joking with Kai yesterday. I was like, hand me your Waldorf card. That's not Waldorf, that we do the Waldorf card a lot. That he has a grandfather that's has like multiple degrees in math and things. So he's always like, "Oh, when you need help with math, just let me know." And Kai's like, "Oh, Grandpa, you know we do Waldorf math."
But you know what? I bet you if that grandpa sat down and went through the Waldorf math, he'd be like, this is sound.
Yeah.
I see people that have higher math degrees often say, well, this is sound. This is an interesting route to go. And it is very evidence-based. And so I think that, people get hung up on what they think is right because of the public school system and what we are indoctrinated with. And it doesn't even matter. Like, even before you had children, you probably had this idea. I know I did. Even though I went to private school, I had this idea of what school was supposed to be, right? And so I think that we have to de-school ourselves so that then we can allow for other ideas to come through. And I think that that's like really important.
I was actually listening to one of Andrew's math videos to put together a sample, I think. And I was like, "Oh, I could actually, like, he's making this fun. Maybe
Right. Andrew's a fun teacher.
I feel like this has been like a second opportunity for me to like re-go through academics, because I'm very honest with Kai and I'm like, I cheated my whole way through high school. I was there to play sports. I was not there
Right.
to learn. It was so boring. Like, and so I'm
Right.
like, oh, I'm learning all this stuff now. And I would do the painting and the form drawing and all this. And I was like, okay, I would have been into this kind of stuff, but the whole just death by textbook,
All right.
I don't
Totally.
remember anything.
There is a beautiful quote. Actually, I'm going to read it. It's in the front of this book here. It's in the front of Rhythms of Learning. And it is one of my favorite quotes. And it's about Waldorf education. It says the self-education of adults is essential for the Waldorf approach to educating children because Waldorf does not consist solely of methods, techniques, or structures, but rather the development of human capacities, those of the children, but also, and more importantly, those of the teachers and the parents. Because we are learning in this space. We are learning how to parent, learning how to teach. We're bringing forth something that we didn't know. And so the more we study child development, the more we understand the way Waldorf works, the easier it becomes for us to parent, to teach, and really to navigate life. So thank you, Vanessa, so much for chatting with me today. This was a great conversation. If you have any questions, please send them to us. We would love to answer them. Feel free to message us and just let us know. You can catch us at the Waldorf Essentials email, which is team@melissanielsen.com, or you can catch us on social media, and we are happy to answer questions. So thank you so much for joining
It's
us.
anything like our experience. We've been with Miss Daniela for 2 years. There's some transition period in the beginning for sure to like get the rhythm down of just something new. But beyond that, it's like the greatest gift for myself and my kids compared to us trying to struggle through homeschooling on our own in the beginning. And yeah, I do try to attend the parent office hours, and I highly recommend trying to do that if you can, because it really has become a really beautiful part of, I think, all of our weeks when we meet there and get to ask all kinds of questions and talk about all kinds of subjects. But yeah, it's wonderful. I love it.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's nothing like a returning family to help spread the love.